Well, my talk will be a little drier, I'm afraid, than Adam's. I don't have, I need to have clearly a video of such a video. So now I'm spending the last 15 minutes thinking about what that video should be. I'm here to talk today about how WCAG 2.0 relates to PDFUA. And as you see, I put PDFUA 1 in here because, and I'm not going to speak to PDFUA 2. We're going to hear about that later on today. You're probably saying, what is PDFUA 2? But there's a great session coming up on that, buckle up. PDFUA 1 is the current version of the PDFUA specification, and I'm comparing WCAG 2.0 to that because PDFUA 2 will be considerably different, and there'll be many different kinds of changes. So without further ado, let's get into it a little bit. And I guess I'll do this out here because I'm not, oh, I need a microphone. Okay, any better?
No.
All right. You can hear me, right? No? You can. There. Okay, let's start with some of the basics. Maybe I need to turn this thing right way over. So, first of all, what we're going to be doing in this session is contrasting WCAG 2.0, which is, as you know, the specification for accessible web content as developed by the W3C, and PDFUA 1, which is the specification for accessible PDF, developed initially by AIM's Committee for PDFUA, based in North America, and subsequently expanded when it became an ISO project beginning in 2008, first published in 2012. So WCAG 2.0, the acronym stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0, replacing, of course, the 1.0 guidelines dating from 1999. It's a W3C recommendation and establishes normative rules for web content. And this turns out to be quite important when one contrasts it with PDF, which is very frequently web content, but not always web content. PDFUA, the UA stands for Universal Accessibility. It's an ISO standard. It was not produced by W3C, but went instead through a formal ISO development process. And it establishes, unlike WCAG, which speaks to web content in general and has detailed provisions covering HTML and video and JavaScript and so on, PDFUA establishes accessibility requirements exclusively for the use of ISO 32000, which is the ISO standard for PDF. And within that, the requirements for tagged PDF, which is a single feature of PDF. So let's take it at the very top level. WCAG 2.0 is structured in a different way, or in a way that's particular to itself, and has very little to do with the way in which PDFUA is structured. WCAG 2.0 starts with a series of 4 general principles. And from those principles, they arrive at a variety of high-level guidelines, which are then organized into a set of specific requirements known as success criteria, which are detailed for various kinds of web content, web technology, with a focus in the language, as it's very readily apparent to see when you begin to examine it, on HTML, and CSS, scripts, and time-based media, which is to say audio and video content. WCAG 2.0, while the specification is written, or it's asserted that the content is fundamentally technologically neutral, the actual specifications and success criteria talk about web standards, and the term web page is used continuously throughout. In many cases, as we'll see as we go through here, the fundamental orientation towards web content in HTML makes it sometimes a little difficult for WCAG 2.0 to be understood as how it applies to PDF content. So PDFUA is really very, very different than WCAG 2.0. There are no formalized principles or guidelines. We start really right in with the specifications about things that are required and things that are prohibited in a PDF document if we're to consider it accessible. It's PDFUA, because it has no high-level general principles or guidelines, it dives straight into technically specific requirements, and that it's all about and exclusively about PDF documents and forms. There are some exceptions. There are a few provisions related to JavaScript, one or two provisions related to things such as time-based media, but the focus, the 99% of the focus of PDFUA is fundamentally all about getting PDF technology right. So briefly, the structure of the documents, and I think I've mentioned a couple of these already. There are 4 principles, 12 guidelines, and 61 success criteria in WCAG 2.0. And these success criteria are organized into 3 conformance levels. Conformance level A are considered to be completely vital and essential. Without meeting conformance level A criteria, you're not even approaching the baseline understanding of what accessibility might be in content. Level AA conformance builds upon level A conformance and expands the scope of requirements such that many types of content and documents will actually be understood to be accessible at that level of conformance. That is characteristically the specification, the conformance level that has been required by organizations, government agencies, and so on that have begun to adopt WCAG 2.0. They generally speaking adopt it at the level AA of conformance, not the level A. The 3 level, the level AAA of conformance, goes beyond the actual technical organization structure of the document and covers a lot of content-related areas and is a very, very high level of conformance, requiring things such as simpler text and so on. Many of the AAA specifications pertain in particular to disabilities that are such as cognitive disabilities and is a lot less to do with print disabilities and other kinds of physical restrictions. So WCAG's requirements apply to both technology and to content, and this is a major distinction as contrasted with PDFUA, and especially, as you'll see later on today, with PDFUA 2 that's on the way. So WCAG, in addition to the principles, the guidelines, and the success criteria, WCAG 2.0 includes a variety of non-normative, that is to say, not strict rules, but informative and official and endorsed techniques for the production of content that meets the various success criteria for WCAG 2.0. In effect, the organization has published a series of methodologies, as they believe them to be the case, that allow you to, if you follow those techniques, to meet the WCAG 2.0 success criteria. If they do not, and this is very important to note, they do not restrict the users to just those techniques in order to produce those conforming outcomes. It's up to implementing agencies to choose their own techniques in order, as long as those techniques that they're willing to assert that those techniques meet the various success criteria, that they provide the relevant testing and so on to assure that, then it's possible for you to develop your own techniques in order to meet WCAG 2.0 specifications. So PDFUA is quite different in several levels. It is organized fundamentally into 3 parts. Most of it pertains to the file format requirements. About 80% of PDFUA details the very, very specific technical aspects of the PDF document that are necessary in order to consider that document as accessible. There are, in addition to file format requirements, as Adam mentioned earlier, there are also requirements for reader software, that is to say, the software that consumes an accessible PDF file. And for AT software, and I think this is unique, quite frankly, I'm not aware of other regulations that may be applied to AT specifically. But both the reader software is required fundamentally to support all of the features that are required in PDFUA files. And the AT requirements require AT to support everything that the reader can consume from a PDFUA document. So it's effectively a story where the requirements of the document, which pertain very much to the authors and the creators of the document, the software that creates the document, the people who write these documents. But not only, that doesn't stop there. After all, if you can't handle that content, then you have no way to understand that you've reliably transmitted that content through assistive technology to the ultimate end user. Instead of conformance levels, PDFUA is more straightforward. You either pass PDFUA or you fail it. And the criteria are organized in that way. There are a number of statements in the ISO world, we call them shall statements. A document shall have this, and it shall have that, or thus this thing shall be organized in such a way. We also allow that we also provide a variety of recommendations in PDFUA, which we characterize in terms of should statements. This thing should be present. That other thing should be true. And finally, we include, we permit things to be present as well with may statements. We allow that, for example, you may attach a file to the PDF document, and so on. When one breaks down PDFUA and organizes it, or thinks of it instead of a document which has paragraphs of text that include shall and should and may statements, when one breaks it down into what we might call strict failure conditions, and I get to this because the Matterhorn Protocol, which is a publication of the PDF Association, was designed very much with this in mind, to give people a more structured way to answer the question, is this document PDFUA conforming? We discovered there are, when you take apart PDFUA, there are 136 specific failure conditions, which is to say individual spots in the document where you could say, we could examine that PDFUA, that document that claims to be accessible, and say, in fact, we notice that it fails this particular condition, and so we therefore it's not entitled to a PDFUA flag, a PDFUA conformance claim. 87 of these checks are checks that a machine can perform. A good example would be, are fonts embedded in the document? Does every glyph in the document have a reference to Unicode so that it can be represented away from the page of the document? 47 of these checks can only be performed by a human, fundamentally. An example of such a check is this thing correctly tagged? If we have a figure tag on a table, that would be a failure of a human checked condition. And 2 of these checks reference other tests. It's a detail. There's no specific test for digital signatures. Instead, one would refer for example, to form field tests in order to evaluate for digital signatures. What's the audience for PDFUA? And for WCAG 2, for that matter. These are subtly different. WCAG 2.0 is because of its very many content provisions, has many provisions that are very specific to content authors and are necessary, particularly at the higher, the AA and AAA levels. Content authors need to be very much involved in thinking through, for example, one of the contrast levels. What's the use of color in a document that they're involving themselves with? Another key audience for WCAG 2.0 are, of course, the web developers who come up with the websites and other kinds of resources that WCAG 2.0 conforming content are expressed through. And finally, as one would be obvious, testers are also very interested in WCAG 2, so they can evaluate whether or not somebody's met their obligations. PDFUA, subtly different. PDFUA's fundamental orientation is not to authors, but to application software developers. Coders, fundamentally, people who write software, whose job it is to provide a product that will, for example, take the contents of a Word file and convert it to PDF. Or perhaps a reader software that will process a given PDF file and generate results that will be displayed through assistive technology. Testers obviously can use PDFUA, but in order to get any kind of value out of PDFUA, you really need a background in the technical realities of PDF. And so that's why we don't say that PDFUA is something that's really intended for authors at all. Testers, we recommend that the testers, if they are certainly obviously welcome to use PDFUA directly, will probably get more value from using the Matterhorn Protocol because it gives them, instead of having to digest the technical specifics of the PDF file, it's a lot easier for a tester or somebody evaluating a PDF document to use the Matterhorn Protocol, which breaks down PDFUA into a series of fundamentally pass-fail type of questions. So what's the content that these standards cover? And there are a lot of similarities and there are a few differences. WCAG 2.0, of course, covers both the text, images, and graphics in a web page, the controls such as links and form fields that allow one to interact with that web content, audio and video content that may be deployed in a web page context, and the scripts that are used in many, many web pages to enable such functionality as navigation. PDFUA, of course, also covers text, images, graphics, controls, and forms in a PDF document, but also includes a number of specifications that are particular to PDF. In an HTML document, everything that's written to the page in some fashion is content and is intended to be there. PDF documents structured a little bit differently and may include such content that is not intended to be read through an assistive technology device. A typical example would be the footers that are placed on a page to indicate, for example, the current chapter. It would be very undesirable for software to be reading along in a PDF document, and when it gets to the bottom of the page, instead of switching to the continuation of paragraph on the next page, that software went and started reading the page footer as part of the current sentence. This would be extremely confusing to a user. And so the PDF technology includes this distinction between the real content, the stuff we actually want to consume, and the artifacts, the stuff that happens to be on the page for various layout and other considerations, but are not really fundamentally part of the document. And of course, as I mentioned previously, PDFUA1 includes some requirements for scripting, but not as elaborate requirements as WCAG 2.0. So let's look at the conformance claims between these two, because there's interesting points of distinction here as well. WCAG 2.0, conformance claims are optional. Okay, you need not make them. And if you do make a conformance claim, you can provide it in a plain text setting. You need not make it machine readable. That is to say that if you want to claim that this particular web page conforms to WCAG 2.0, no part of the while WCAG 2.0 does set out requirements for how you claim conformance, those requirements do not include a requirement that a machine should be able to detect whether or not the conformance claim is being made. So really it has to be examined on an individual basis by a user, and that determination would have to be made, and it would not therefore persist over and would not be portable with that content. And also interoperability issue, and I'll speak more to interoperability in a minute. In practice, as it turns out, very few people bother with WCAG 2.0 conformance claims as they are defined by that specification. The Web Accessibility Initiative that writes WCAG 2.0 does not actually include a WCAG conformance claim on the document itself. So it's, while it's optional, it's possible to include a conformance claim. In practice, it seems very few actually do it. PDFUA is completely different in this regard. And it's different because it's different in a way that's consistent with the basic fundamental value proposition of PDF, as I'll explain. PDFUA1 requires a conformance claim, which is rather interesting. You can have a PDF document that's fully tagged in all respects, fully accessible, and yet it doesn't actually formally comply with PDFUA until a little piece of metadata is included. We in the industry call it a flag. Okay? It's a little piece of XML metadata that sits on the document, and by itself, that piece of XML does not contribute in any way, shape, or form to the accessibility of the document. It's nonetheless required for PDFUA conformance. Why is that? A PDFUA flag represents something that relates very closely to the value proposition of PDF itself. A PDFUA flag is portable. It travels along with the document. That is, of course, the fundamental root value of PDF is the concept of a portable document. So PDFUA flag, part of the document, and it travels. If I email that file to somebody else, they too can see that the PDFUA flag is present. Because it's portable, it's also persistent. It doesn't go away. You can, of course, remove the flag, but wherever that PDF file goes, the flag goes with it, and so that claim continues, is present to anybody who possesses the file. It's easily detectable. It's sitting in XML metadata, and the specification for that flag is entirely defined within the specification. So there's no problem with software. For example, you could take a piece of software designed to detect this flag, aim it at a website, and in very, very short order determine that of all the PDF files in that particular website, these 15 files or 3,000 files or whatever it is claim conformance to PDFUA. Because it's portable, persistent, and easily detectable, the PDFUA flag makes the claim of conformance accountable. Because that flag is there, the original author of the document is making an assertion that this file is accessible. And this is very valuable to several levels. To organizations that need to claim that their content is accessible and need to be able to do so in a lightweight manner that can be readily verified or controlled or managed by their own systems. And of course, it makes it possible to hold that author, that software producer, and so on to account. if you discover that the file in fact is not accessible for some reason, and that accessibility problem is related to the PDFUA specifications, you can go ahead and you now have a way to say, well, this file claims it, but it's not true, and so therefore a conversation can begin about it. The PDFUA flag is a promise by the software developer that produced the PDF file, by the author of that PDF file, that this file is accessible. Okay. No, I didn't want him to do that. What's he doing? Why is he doing? I do need my slide. There it is again. Okay. So I already gave you this part. Okay, application. WCAG 2.0 is all about web pages. When one reads through WCAG 2.0, it becomes very clear. Every single reference to the document or the content in consideration is a reference to a web page. Not everything in the web, frankly, or certainly not everything in the world of electronic content is organized in web page terms. Application of WCAG 2.0 to other technologies has to be deduced. So, for example, is a web page the same thing as a page of a PDF file, or is it the same thing as a PDF document? A relatively basic question that WCAG 2.0 does not answer. WCAG 2.0 provides no real guidance on such questions, which makes it relatively difficult, and the more the technology differs from web pages, and PDF differs quite a bit in a variety of ways, the harder it is to apply WCAG 2.0 directly, and as a result, the more difficult it becomes for different agencies, different people, different understandings of WCAG 2.0 to align. This creates risk and difficulties for people who are implementing accessibility standards across a variety of technologies. But PDFUA 1 is entirely specific to PDF documents. Reliability of this clicker is going. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of one of these things. WCAG 2.0 has a variety of techniques, as I mentioned before. These are informative techniques. The the technique known as PDF3 has to do with the ordering of content in a PDF file and ensuring that that order is correct. This is one of the most important characteristics of a PDF document or of any content in terms of accessibility. If the words are not appearing to assistive technology in the correct logical sequence, then the chance of a user being able to understand what it is that they're reading are effectively zero. So PDF3 is extremely important, and indeed, as the content on the WCAG's website explains, it's critical to 3 of WCAG 2.0's level A requirements. But example 4 that's offered in the techniques recommends the Acrobat's reflow view as a methodology for checking reading order. Reflow view does not use tags in a PDF file in order to reflow the document. So if the tags if the tagged order and what you view in reflow order in a particular application, specifically Acrobat, differ, you're not going to, and they generally speaking do. Example 4 is going to leave you extremely confused when you attempt to verify whether or not you use that example to verify whether or not a particular PDF file is in fact accessible. Example 5 that is offered by Web Accessibility Initiative has a similar problem. It recommends using the order panel in Acrobat to check the reading order. There's no specific reason to believe that the order panel necessarily reflects the logical order. It can reflect the logical order, but there's nothing forcing it to do so, no obvious reason why it should do so. So there are some distinctive kinds of, there are distinctions between these two things because the folks who develop WCAG 2.0 are fundamentally oriented to web technologies. Such kinds of confusion that appear in their formal techniques, and this is a problem and I think a major inhibitor for people who have been developing accessible PDF technology, is that they run into questions that really have no solution in terms of the techniques that WCAG offers. I want to say a couple things about interoperability because it's, again, another key distinction between WCAG 2.0 and PDF. First, what is interoperability? It's the ability of a system or a product to work with other systems or products without special effort on the part of the customer. Like the good old electrical plugs are a classic example of a situation where you either have interoperability or you do not. In this particular case, not really excellent interoperability. So why does this matter? Interoperability is vital in computer systems, and in particular computer systems for materials that have to be shared. It's necessary to reduce risk for software developers who are going to invest in developing solutions, accessibility solutions, and other similar types of approaches to sharing content. If software developers are not able to count on a particular methodology for structuring their content, in the sense that when they hand it over to a third party, that third party can readily consume it, then their reason to invest in developing that goes down a great deal. Frankly, they have no idea who they can sell their software to. They would have to establish really the principle that their methodology is one that everybody else would have to adopt. Interoperability, the achievement of true interoperability, reduces therefore the risk for people who are creating software. Interoperability, when it's achieved, increases the availability of accessible content to end users who use a variety of different kinds of software. If all the developers are on precisely the same page about how to structure and organize and documents, it becomes much easier for every developer in order to adopt that specification, and therefore users who have very, very different needs in terms of AT will have a far greater chance of getting a great deal of value from the content once they do so. Interoperability also fosters a general and common understanding and assists in the adoption and development of best practice by end users and developers in order to achieve accessible content that can be readily shared. So let's look at how interoperability is accommodated in terms of WCAG 2.0 and PDFUA. In WCAG 2.0, interoperability as such is not a design feature of the specification. It has a concept instead that they call accessibility supported, and I'll mention that in a moment. So WCAG 2.0, however, it's really very much a standard that's specific to HTML and the web and that characteristic or classical web content technology. And so it does indeed provide sufficient specification to achieve interoperability in HTML by and large. That is to say, if you generate a web page that conforms to WCAG 2.0, it's extremely likely that that web page will be fully portable for other browsers and will operate well with AT that's expecting HTML. Not necessarily true for other formats such as PDF. So in PDFUA, interoperability is a key design objective. Very much in line with what we need from PDF to begin with. After all, PDF was originally developed so that I can generate a document and share it with somebody else, not me personally, but anybody. Can generate a document, share it around, and every user gets precisely the same experience of the document. PDFUA, very much aligned with the design principles and objective of PDF, also provides that sort of approach to dealing with accessible PDF. And so in terms of dealing with interoperability from a software point of view, not only in PDFUA, as I've explained before, do the file formats are fully specified, but there are corresponding requirements so that one can know whether or not a piece of software or assistive technology are in fact conforming with the specification, and by that understand whether or not the problem that we have is in a particular document, it's insufficiently tagged, it's insufficiently accessible, or whether or not it's in the software that may, for example, be incapable of handling a particular accessibility feature. So what is accessibility supported? In WCAG 2.0, they define the concept as the way in which the web technology is used must be supported by users-assistive technology. It makes a great deal of sense in a number of different levels. If you produce a document that you'd like to assert where the content conforms to WCAG 2.0, but there's no software out there to actually be able to deal with the techniques that you use to make it conform, that you assert it conform, then it really can't be claimed to be WCAG conforming because it's not so-called accessibility supported. So WCAG 2.0 insists that there be accessibility supported user agents available to users to handle the techniques that were used to meet the accessibility, meet the success criteria. As a result, for WCAG 2.0, conformance with the specification is something that's not actually in the document author's control. The document author can do a great job here, but depending upon the nature, how they test the documents, and the assumptions that they make about the kinds of software that the users out there are using, different people may have a different perception about whether or not a given document is in fact conforming with WCAG 2.0, not based upon the nature of the document and its structure, but whether or not the particular software they're using to evaluate it. PDFUA is quite different. There's no similar concept to accessibility supported. There are instead, as I've said, specifications for conforming readers and assistive technology. And thus, conformance requirements for authors and for the software developers who produce accessible PDF files are distinct, are completely distinctive from the nature of the technology itself. It's all, as it were, self-contained, and the author's job is very clear, and it's distinguished and separated from the job of the consuming reader developer. So how should you use WCAG 2.0 with PDFUA 1? After all, WCAG 2.0 is characteristically the specification that's being adopted by many agencies around the world. While the US Access Board appears to be moving towards a situation where they'll require WCAG 2.0 for web content and PDFUA for PDF content, that's not a general thing. In the upcoming European legislation, WCAG 2.0 is mentioned, PDFUA isn't. So how do you work with these two things together? In WCAG, the one way that I'd suggest that you think about it, and there are several ways you can think about this. This is not the canonically correct one. But one way to think about it is that WCAG 2.0, you could leverage its author orientation and think about it in terms of the document content. In particular, you might focus on, because these are areas of strength in WCAG and less so in PDFUA, you might focus on the issues such as contrast. You might refer to WCAG 2.0 to ensure that the JavaScripts that you're using are in fact accessible. That the time-based media's audio and video content is accessible and meets WCAG's criteria. Those criteria are quite extensive and specific to audio and video. The criteria for audio and video in PDFUA are limited to a description of that content, which is really not in any way a way to make video content accessible. And of course, if you need to conform with level AAA requirements, such that are specific to the variety of high-level contrast, the nature, the simplicity of the content, and so on, you're going to need to refer to WCAG 2.0 because PDFUA doesn't address it. You might then think of, so with WCAG 2.0, you might think of referring to it from the point of view of document content. For PDFUA, you might think of it in terms of file format and structure. Whether or not, for example, those page footers and headers are included in the accessible portion of the content, the ordering of content, the use of the tags, so appropriately using a figure tag or a heading tag and so on, and the attributes for these tags. All these things are clearly and specifically delineated in PDF 2.0. And so, it was ideal to, when you're creating a PDF document, to ensure that you're referring to the actual structures in use. And that would imply that in order to make it accessible PDF, you would go ahead and look at it from PDFUA 2.0 standard perspective. A brief word about heading levels, because it's about the only area in which WCAG 2.0 and PDFUA clash slightly. In WCAG 2.0, authors may skip heading levels. The sequence H2, H3, H5 is legal in WCAG 2.0. Okay? Not here, it's not a, that's the fact of the matter. In PDFUA 1, authors may not skip heading levels. There are many arguments on both sides of this matter. There are certainly, and I'm moving towards the position that, in fact, maybe UA1 shouldn't have done this. I know there's some people in this room who will be rather interested to hear me say that. But I'll leave the UA2 discussion to Olaf for later on today. This is one important area. If you're going to, from a content management point of view, if you need your document to conform with UA1, you're not going to be able to go from H1 to H3 or H1 to H5 or similar, kind of skipping and heading levels. Whereas in WCAG 2.0, you'd be able to do so. So let's begin to summarize here. I'd suggest that fundamentally that you need to use them both. WCAG 2.0 by itself is insufficient to assure universally accessible PDF documents. It simply doesn't include all the technical requirements that are necessary to provide for a fully portable and fully consistent experience of accessible content in PDF form. UA1 is insufficient to address all of WCAG's content requirements. So it's rather important to know that if your regulatory requirement is for WCAG 2.0, it doesn't mention PDFUA, you're going to need to meet WCAG when you're doing a PDF document. And so if, for example, you need WCAG 2.0 provides for a very specific contrast requirement. That contrast requirement doesn't exist in PDFUA. There are specifications for JavaScript, for time-based media, and as I mentioned, level AAA requirements. If you need to meet those kinds of specifications, you're certainly going to need to refer to WCAG 2.0. So there are exceptions of a sort. Number one, you can use WCAG 2.0 without PDFUA when? Well, if the content has no structure whatsoever, you might be able to get away with it. If you have a single page PDF file, and it includes a single line or maybe even a paragraph of content, and that's all there is on the page, you actually don't even need tags at all. It's an academic point, but it's not because there are very few such documents in the world. But nonetheless, that is the kind of situation where you need not refer to a PDF accessibility standard. Another reason you might do it is that universal accessibility is not really your objective. You're instead looking to produce a solution that works in a very, very specific setting. And that's another reason where you could use WCAG 2.0 all by itself. On the other hand, you can use PDFUA without WCAG 2.0 if the PDF content doesn't include a variety of features that only WCAG 2.0 addresses and the PDFUA does not. If, for example, it's just plain black text or on pages, there's no use of contrast, for example. If there's no time-based media, if there's no JavaScript, then there's no need fundamentally to refer to WCAG 2.0 specifically in order to achieve conformance with it. So let's keep it really simple. Use PDFUA to make WCAG 2.0 conforming PDF documents. What do authors need to know in order to achieve that? Well, for WCAG 2.0, conformance requires accessible source content, so that you can and authors, after all, need to be able to make something that's going to be accessible. It's necessary to understand WCAG 2.0 requirements in order to generate WCAG 2.0 conforming source content. WCAG PDFUA 1 conformance builds upon the understandings that an author includes in their source document. It requires, instead of focusing fundamentally on the author and their activities, if the author is already aware of WCAG's requirements, then the PDFUA portion of this only happens as software, and it need not be something that they're even aware of. PDFUA 1 requires capable software to produce an accessible PDF from accessible source content, but in fact it doesn't necessarily require that a user or an author understand PDFUA. If authors understand WCAG requirements, as they would need to in order to produce files that meet the specifications that so many agencies are adopting, WCAG 2.0. And if they possess the capable software, that is to say software that is capable of making a PDFUA document, and if they know how to use it, and these are three distinct factors that cannot be assumed, but then if those three things are true, then UA is not something that an author really needs to understand at all. It's something that's quite appropriately part of the software, and the software can and should produce a PDFUA document without actually bothering the author with a specific question that's pertaining to PDFUA at all. that's my presentation. I'd be delighted to take any questions that you have.
So, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Thank you for enlightening us. Just a question for clarification, I guess. I'm just trying to figure when we publish, when we have a publication including video material, and we'll make sure that it's the text and everything is PDFUA, but would we still have a PDFUA publication although the video or the website that we link to is not compliant with the WCAG 2.0? Or how should we, you know?
So if the audio or video content, duplicate that, the audio or video content is included, is embedded in the PDF document, all the PDFUA requires is that there be a textual description of that video, not a transcript, right? Not actually a complete evocation of it. You put a movie in there, that description could say, this is, Indiana Jones in the movie, right? That's not accessible. But that's all PDFUA would have to say on the matter. So that document could conform to PDFUA, but would definitely not conform to WCAG in that case. And that's why it's necessary to refer to WCAG anytime there's time-based media included in the PDF. Now, the circumstance you mentioned, there's a case where there's a link off to that movie elsewhere. And here's a case where that's video content that's not included in the PDF document. And so there's no need to refer to WCAG with respect to that document at all in order to make it accessible. UA is enough for the document, and all the questions about whether the video are accessible are all about the website where that video content is residing and the way in which it's presented. Other questions?
Okay, Dirk from Germany. One question about WCAG 2. You said WCAG 2 relates to HTML, but I don't think that it's really true. When I make a search through WCAG 2 requirements document, I cannot find HTML at all. But just a term. They are more technical, independently formulated, I think. And its history. WCAG 1 was for HTML, but WCAG 2 is absolutely independently formulated. And so I don't think that it's really true, but it just refers to HTML. It refers to web pages. And if you look at success criteria 411, which pertains to which identifies the parsing requirements, those are specific to HTML. I'd say that it refers basically to web technologies, not specifically to HTML, but to the stack. Technologies, yes. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and so on. Mm-hmm. Because the terminology, while they use terminology that avoids the acronym HTML, and you're quite right, in reference to web pages, it's hard to know, and it's hard to know what else they would be referring to beyond HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But at the moment when you publish a PDF document on the internet, it's web technology as well. It's web it's web content, but it's not a web page. And the term in WCAG is web page. It's web technology, not a web page, you're true. Is it web technology? Is it not web technology until you put it on the web? So if I take it off the web and I put it on my hard drive, is it still web technology? I think it's most useful to think of it in terms of, it's a distinctive technology from the technology that WCAG 2.0 was written to address. It's totally true that the language of WCAG 2.0, they made an enormous effort, and I think a very good effort, yes, in order to make it, to attempt, frankly, to ensure that it was as technologically neutral as possible. Yes. But the nature of the language that they chose, in particular referring to web pages, and in failing to acknowledge that there are kinds of content that would express themselves in ways other than in web pages, make it very difficult to understand how to apply WCAG 2.0 to all other forms of technologies. So for example,
The idea of artifacts versus real content is something that WCAG 2.0 doesn't acknowledge at all.
No.
The idea of the question of whether or not a PDF page or a PDF document is to be understood as a web page is something that WCAG doesn't answer.
Mhm.
And these are critical points. If one is going to only use WCAG 2.0 as one's guide for deciding whether content is accessible, you're going to have a lot of difficulty with convincing the developers that they know exactly what to do in a PDF document based upon WCAG's 2.0 requirements.
Okay, we still need both.
Oh yeah.
I think we are getting close to lunch, but maybe one last fast question here.
Hi, Klaus again from Austria. I think I have to make it clear. I understood the question, but from your point of view, a website which is AA compliant, WCAG 2, which has a non-tagged PDF on it, is still AA compliant or not?
Well, the WCAG conformance claims they can be made for an entire website, but they also, specifications also say that no, the claim is made on a per page basis. You could make it on a site basis, but then they do have rules for whether or not there's partial compliance or not. I believe it's, to answer the question of if you have a web page that links to a PDF file, then the question of whether or not that PDF file is accessible is not answered by looking at the web page. It's only answerable by looking at the PDF document.
Yeah.
So I think it's perfectly possible you could have a web page that conforms to WCAG 2.0. It includes a link to an untagged PDF, and that web page would still be conforming with WCAG 2.0. I believe that's the WCAG's understanding as well.
Okay, I think it's lunchtime now. We'll say thank you to Duff Johnson once more.